from America's finest city. This is Real Talk San Diego on ESPN 1700.
What's happening, gang? It is Thursday at 10, and it's time for The Truth. Welcome to Truth Radio. We track down some local leaders, sharing some industry-specific secrets and stories, all from, of course, personal experience, with one purpose. When you're up in here, you got to tell the truth. And gang, hoping to leave you a little better than how we found you. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, co-founder of the Greenhouse Group, helping folks get into and out of homes, residential real estate consulting. If you want to learn a little bit more about who we are and what we're doing over here in the heart of San Diego, easy for me to say, check us out at thegreenhousegroupinc.com. And gang, I'm flanked by, I love this. This is so good. Stephanie Mendez. Now, you might say her day job is family law, but while we got her up in here in Truth Radio, we challenged her. We said, Steph, if you come in, you got to tell the truth. And she says, oh, I'm good at that because I am
the Jerry Springer family law attorney.
That gets a round of applause right there.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun, gang. And Stephanie has actually came prepared. Even though we're trying to make this as levitus as possible, I mean, the reality is that this is something that you're doing the good work, you might say, and I catch downriver, downstream this conversation all too often where it's not done or led or proctored correctly, and so we wanted to invite Stephanie in so we could have a little bit deeper conversation. We're going to call this one, gang, Know Your Rights That You Have Before You Agree to let them go. Tell them a little bit more about that, Steph.
So a lot of times people come to talk to me about divorce, legal separation, custody, whatever issues that they're facing at the time. And when we get into talking about the process, talking about what that all involves, they have no idea. And so we get into the specifics and they say, I had no idea I'm entitled to that. I had no idea that that's even happening, that that's even allowed. So I always tell people, whether you hire me, hire somebody else, you want to know what you have and what you're entitled to before you make any kind of an agreement with anything. So,
yeah, I mean, it seems pretty basic, because it's all so permanent once you get to that word agreement. But if you had to sort of parse this down, what would be maybe the top 2 or 3 things that they would need to focus on in order to make sure, like, hey, things can go wrong. You can kind of account for that, but make sure you've got these 3 attuned and in focus. What would those be?
So the first one would be like financially, when you talk about support, whether there's children involved or not, a spouse is entitled to spousal support. For the most part, there obviously are some exceptions, and that's a very lawyerly rule. You have this basic rule, but there's always exceptions to everything. So it's a case-specific incident, but, you're entitled to spousal support. The other person will say, I'm not giving you anything. You don't deserve it. You're not entitled to it. But in reality, you are. So that's one of the main things that people always get.
Our goal in here is to tell the truth, have a little bit deeper conversation for Truth Nation. So maybe just let me find myself in a quick example about that, because in California, we are always told that there is just it's a right of way almost when it comes to that conversation. So what would have been protect the names to protect the innocent. But what was one example of where somebody was not entitled to that? Not
entitled to support? Well, It was a short-term marriage. And in California, anything less than 10 years is short-term marriage. But it was a short-term marriage and extremely short, like months. And they were stay-at-home wife or spouse, and husband made the money. We get into court, but because wife had significant assets available to her, the court said no support. So
interesting.
So I mean, as I said, there's obviously exceptions to everything. It all depends specifically on the individual circumstances and facts, but overall there's an average, and then obviously the exceptions to the rule. But that was one of them.
But for the most part, what I heard you say is that you have a right to financial support.
Absolutely.
And, maybe you hate to use the word guaranteed.
Right. And that's one of the things that I was taught very early on as a lawyer, especially in family law. You never, ever, ever make promises, never, ever, ever make any guarantees, because you can't. You're not the one making the decision. So you can say, in my opinion, in front of this judge, this is your likelihood as a lawyer, that's what we're supposed to do. You're supposed to tell them the outcome of and be pretty confident of that.
To be prepared for that.
Absolutely.
Manage expectations. That sounds very familiar, I guess, to what we do too. But that's interesting what you just brought up, though. That little bee wasn't in my bonnet. Judge.
Yes.
Big variable.
A huge variable.
Yeah. So just invite me in that room a little bit without going too far down the rabbit hole.
So obviously the judge is the one that's ultimately making the decision. As a lawyer, and even if you represent yourself, you're considered your own lawyer. You present your case the best way that you can. But the judge may not like the case. They may not agree with you. And even though you have everything on your side, the judge could make an alternate decision, which somebody wasn't expecting or obviously came out of the blue. I mean, you have no control over the ultimate outcome. All you can do, and what I tell people, all I can do is the best I can do with what I have in front of me and do the best and present the best case. But it's out of my hands what the decision is. It's
kind of old, like Wild Wild West style when you think about it like that, like the personalities involved and how you need to cater to them. It really, to me, what comes up for me is that it's a testament to experience.
Absolutely it is. I mean, I have a case, not currently, it was an old case, but the other person on the other side wasn't that familiar with family law. And it really shows. I mean, it really shows. I take my job as a lawyer, not just to represent my client's interests, but to promote justice and what's the right thing to do, whether that may or may not be the best thing for the situation. I try and do what's right, and I try and do what the law says, and I also try and help the other person, other side, other attorney get better, because as lawyers, we're one small community, so we all want to try and help each other and make sure that they're working what they need to be doing to make sure the whole system flows together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes for a good TV drama or blockbuster movie for one person's experiential capital to trump somebody else's. It's a good drama. It's a good little twist on it. But in the reality, I don't know if you share this sentiment, but when I'm out there negotiating for my client's behalf on getting into it out of homes, I like to make triple win scenarios. You know, and so obviously my fiduciary obligation is to my client, and I'm not going to underplay that card. But it's also important, I think, to have a consciousness about the overall ethics or even ethos or how you see yourself inside that conversation, to where you're not taking unfair advantage of situations.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like, we've all been in situations where we've been on the short side of that stick, and it's a bad scenario for all people involved. And you don't need to do that. You don't have to go for the jugular.
Absolutely. And when I meet with clients, after, talking with them and everything, I say you have to pick the person that's going to do what you want them to do. If you want a really super aggressive bulldog fighter, there's attorneys out there that'll do that.
Yeah.
If you want someone who's just going to, be real with you and tell you, hey, this is what you're going to get, likely going to get, why spend 10, 15, 20, 30 grand on this when you're going to end up with this result? Honestly, that's me. I don't spend their money needlessly. I don't do things that aren't warranted, and I tell them straight up, if you want somebody like that, go to somebody else, because I'm not the one.
That's Stephanie Mendez, gang, owner of the law offices of Stephanie Mendez. You can check her out at smendezlaw.com. So financial is obviously a big one. Let's check out what would be next on that list. What if there's kids involved and stuff like that?
So that's huge. So in what I tell, and in my experience, the most litigated issues in family law and divorce specifically are support and custody. That makes up almost 80% of why you're going into court and why, it's so much animosity and conflict. When kids are involved, both parents want, obviously, to be a huge part of the life of the child. But what they sometimes...
You hope.
Yes, absolutely, I hope. And I presume when somebody comes to me, I presume that this is what they're going to want.
Right.
And so I'm going to tell them, ideally, this is what 50-50 is, what everybody wants. In reality, is that going to happen? Well, it depends. It's all fact specific. People come in and they don't like my answers and they leave really quick.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to lie. I tell them, hey, this is the reality. This is what's going on. You have a child that's 2-3 years old. You're not going to get 50-50 unless the other side agrees.
Perfectly said, from a perfect candidate for this conversation, Truth Radio. So obviously financial, big part of it, talking about the right to spousal support, staying away from the word guarantee,
yes.
but understanding that there's a big piece of that, because we're trying to know the rights that you have before you let them go. So if custody is maybe second on them, the parent has to understand that there's shared visitation.
Yes.
You don't just get to hoard, and
Yes.
haul off into a creepy van and take off, and never see him again. So anything else on that list that we're not thinking of?
So there's also, the not financial, the assets. And, if you break divorce into sections, like I like to do, you have your first step is the initial filing. Mm-hmm. Second step is the support, custody, emergency orders, temporary orders. And the third thing is your finances your assets and debts.
Okay.
So with that section, a lot of times people come in and say, oh, well, we've only been married 2 years. They have, for example, a retirement 401k
mm-hmm.
that they were putting in before we got married and
mm-hmm.
during the marriage. And when I say, well, that's community property, they say, but I was only married for a year. I'm not entitled to it. Absolutely you are. And I hear a lot, well, my husband, my wife, my spouse says that I'm not getting it. Well, they can say whatever they want, but in reality, the court's going to give it to you. You can waive it. You can say, I don't want it, but know that you're absolutely entitled to it and you don't have to let that go.
So that's interesting. Now, when you talk about like retirement, 401ks, pensions and stuff. So if I'm hearing you correctly, like let's say somebody was working in their profession and they were contributing to that for 10 years in advance of arbitrarily,
mm-hmm.
meeting the person, they got married, they were only married for a month or a year, whatever, it doesn't
mm-hmm.
matter. So how would the court look at that? In your experience, like, would they grade that on a scale kind of, or is it just like, nope, it's all right in there 50-50 kind of thing?
So obviously the first 10 years or so that person paid into is their separate property, that person, the spouse is not entitled to it.
Got
because
it.
Anything before marriage is yours and you keep it. Going into the marriage, it's still yours. It doesn't change just because you got married. I know some states do that, but California, luckily we don't. So, but from the time of marriage to the time of separation, that duration of time, you're absolutely entitled to it.
That's very interesting.
And you're entitled to the interest accrued on that time frame of contributions.
And because the same thing I would guess would apply to like real estate, right?
Absolutely.
So what would happen if, so let's use that same scenario, except let's swap in houses. So let's say you own a house for 10 years and then you meet the girl, you get married, and then, they move in and then let's do A and B. So A is they're contributing to the mortgage. Mm-hmm. And B is that they're not financially, but maybe they still are, like helping the kids and stuff mm-hmm. like that. How would the courts look at that?
So, okay, let's talk Section A or Exhibit A first.
Okay.
So,
hold on, you get a point for being lawyerly on that, making this feel like a courtroom.
Thank you. So in the first scenario, I'm going to say husband owned the house just for sake of this conversation. Husband owned it, met wife, got married. They live in the house now. So what a lot of people don't understand is whether the wife works or doesn't work, whatever's acquired during the date of marriage is community property.
Got it.
If husband earns every single dollar, doesn't matter. It's community. So they're paying down the mortgage together.
Right.
So she's entitled in any kind of a divorce or legal separation, she's entitled to what's called a payback, essentially, of the principal of the mortgage.
During the time that they were married.
Yes.
Got it.
During the time that they were married.
Got it. What if the home was owned outright?
So if the home was owned outright, and then if there was any maintenance, if there was any additional
taxes,
costs, possibly.
Okay.
But again, just because you get married doesn't change the nature of the property. So it would still be his separate property. So now if we go into scenario B, where sorry, say it again.
No. I think you did it actually. If I'm tracking back correctly, because one was that she's paying in like she's got a job, and the other was that she's actually at home, maybe like helping the kids and stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, whether she's working or not, she'd still get part of the value. She wouldn't get any equity in the home necessarily. She wouldn't be obligated or make the other person have to sell the home.
But it would be part of the settlement, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Right.
Maybe not settlement, maybe negotiations, because everything is a factor that can be negotiated.
Fair enough. What's coming up for me in here, and you kind of run through these, is that, while these might be the three most important things to make sure that you've got, accounted for or whatever, there's probably also some others. So this isn't your first rodeo talking about this. So do you have any resources that you could point people in the direction of to get the... Rest of the story?
Absolutely. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
On my website, I put in some kind of blurbs and everything, background information on each separate issue. Also, the San Diego Superior Court website has some forms and things that you can download as well. It's all on my website as well.
That sounds great. So that website is S. Mendez Law. That's SMendezLaw.com.
Yes.
Or, hey, if you like Steph, picking up the vibe she's laying down, call her the old-fashioned way at 760-213-2395. Gang, coming up. If you're planning on splitting up in the next 6 months, this is who you'll want to become. I'm thinking of some people right now having some conversations with us last week that might want to tune into this. And we got that coming up next with Stephanie Mendez. We'll be right back.